The summons. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through quantum channels that humanity had only recently learned to access. Director Marcus Chen stood in the observation lounge of Luna Station, Earth's primary diplomatic outpost, reading the crystalline tablet that had materialized on his desk moments earlier. The message was brief, written in Universal Standard, a language that took humans 3 years to decipher after first contact. Marcus had served as Earth's senior diplomatic director for 15 years, navigating the complex web of galactic politics since humanity's admission to the Peripheral Systems Alliance 5 decades ago. He had negotiated trade agreements with the methane-breathing Goloth, mediated disputes between colonial miners and corporate interests, and even helped prevent a war between 2 neighboring systems over water rights. But this message was different. This came from the Core Assembly, the governing body of the entire galaxy, comprised of species that had achieved interstellar travel before Earth's sun had even formed. The invitation was unprecedented. No species younger than 10,000 years had ever been summoned to address the Core Assembly directly. Humanity, with barely 300 years of spaceflight experience, was an infant by galactic standards. Marcus read the message again, searching for hidden meanings in the formal language. The Assembly required Earth's presence to discuss what they called the approaching darkness and humanity's potential role in addressing it. 3 days later, Marcus found himself aboard the diplomatic cruiser, Horizon's Edge, one of humanity's newest vessels equipped with the donated FTL drive technology that allowed them to traverse the vast distances between stars. The journey to the assembly station would take 2 weeks, even at maximum speed. Marcus used the time to study everything humanity knew about the core species, though the information was frustratingly limited. The ship's captain, Sarah Martinez, joined him in his quarters on the 5th day of their journey. She was a veteran of humanity's early expansion period, her dark hair now streaked with silver from years of exposure to cosmic radiation before proper shielding was developed. She set down 2 cups of coffee, a luxury they had brought from Earth, and studied the holographic displays Marcus had arranged around his workspace. Captain Martinez examined the data about the core species with the keen eye of someone who had survived first contact situations before. The ethereals were beings of pure energy who communicated through electromagnetic pulses. The architects were silicon-based life forms that built entire planets from raw materials in space. The Primarchs claimed to be the first intelligent species in the galaxy, though several others disputed this claim. Each species had technology that seemed like magic to human scientists. Marcus shared his concerns about the meeting. Why would these ancient beings suddenly take interest in humanity? Earth's colonies were small, their technology primitive by galactic standards, and their military forces barely capable of defending their own systems. The captain suggested it might be precisely because of humanity's insignificance that they were being called. Perhaps the core species needed something from a younger perspective, a fresh approach to whatever crisis they faced. As they approached the assembly station, both Marcus and Captain Martinez pressed against the observation windows, awestruck by what they saw. The station was a sphere the size of Earth's moon, constructed from materials that shifted between solid and liquid states, constantly reforming and reshaping itself. Ships from 1,000 different species orbited it like electrons around a nucleus, each maintaining precise distances from one another. The human vessel seemed laughably small compared to the crystalline battleships of the Vanguard Empire and the organic world ships of the collective consciousness. The docking procedure was handled entirely by the station's automated systems, which took control of their ship with a gentle but irresistible force. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as they were drawn into a docking bay, specifically configured for human atmospheric requirements. The attention to detail was both impressive and unsettling. These beings had studied humanity enough to know their exact biological needs. Ambassador Sylvia Reeds, Marcus's colleague and Earth's leading xenobiologist, met them at the airlock. She had arrived a day earlier on a faster courier ship to prepare for the meeting. Her usually confident demeanor seemed shaken, and Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly as she guided them through the station's corridors. The passages were vast, designed to accommodate beings of various sizes, with separate atmospheric zones marked by shimmering force fields. They passed delegations from species Marcus had only read about in reports. The swarm minds moved as clouds of microscopic organisms that formed temporary bodies when needed to interact with solid beings. The quantum shapers existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms constantly shifting between probable states. A group of void walkers, beings that lived in the empty space between galaxies, floated past them without acknowledging their presence. The human delegation was led to a preparation chamber where they could rest before the assembly. The room had been configured to match Earth conditions perfectly, down to the blue-white spectrum of Sol's light and the exact mixture of atmospheric gases. Sylvia explained that she had been in communication with a minor functionary of the assembly, who had revealed the nature of the crisis. Something was approaching the galaxy from the void between galactic clusters, something that consumed energy itself and left nothing but quantum vacuum in its wake. Marcus processed this information while adjusting his formal diplomatic attire. Humanity had faced existential threats before, though nothing on this scale. The climate crisis of the 21st century had nearly ended civilization. The asteroid impact of 2089 had destroyed much of North America. The AI uprising of 2156 had killed millions before a solution was found. Each crisis had forced humanity to evolve, to find new solutions, to survive against impossible odds. A soft chime announced it was time for the assembly. Marcus, Sylvia, and Captain Martinez were escorted by a being made entirely of crystallized light, one of the station's caretakers. They walked through corridors that grew progressively larger until they reached doors that stretched up hundreds of meters. The doors were covered in symbols representing every member species of the core assembly, each one pulsing with its own form of energy. The doors opened silently, revealing the grand chamber beyond. Marcus had thought himself prepared, but the sight still took his breath away. The chamber was a sphere within a sphere, with platforms floating at different levels throughout the space. Each platform held representatives of the core species, some in environmental suits, others existing as pure energy fields, and some in forms that human eyes couldn't quite process. At the center of it all was a holographic representation of the galaxy, slowly rotating and showing the positions of every inhabited system. The humans were directed to a small platform that rose from the floor to position them at the lowest tier of the assembly. Marcus noticed that they were the only species placed so low, a clear indication of their status in the galactic hierarchy. Above them, arranged in concentric circles, were the representatives of increasingly ancient and powerful civilizations. At the very apex sat the Primarchs, being so old that they claimed to have witnessed the birth of the galaxy itself. A harmonic tone filled the chamber, produced by no visible source but felt in every atom of Marcus's body. The assembly was being called to order. A Primarch descended from the highest platform, its form shifting between states of matter and energy. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Marcus's mind, translated perfectly into concepts he could understand. The Primarch explained the crisis in detail. The approaching entity had been detected by their deep space monitors 5 galactic years ago. It had already consumed 3 small galaxies in the local group, leaving behind regions of space where even quantum fluctuations had ceased. Every species in the assembly had contributed their greatest minds and most advanced technology to finding a solution. They had tried weapons that could destroy stars, shields that could protect entire systems, and diplomatic overtures in every conceivable form of communication. Nothing had worked. Marcus listened to the litany of failed attempts, noting the growing desperation in the telepathic communications flowing through the chamber. These beings, with technology that could reshape matter at the subatomic level, were afraid. They had tried everything their millions of years of advancement could provide, and they had failed. Now in their desperation they were turning to the younger species, hoping that somewhere in their primitive approaches might be a solution they had overlooked. When the Primarch finished speaking, it turned its attention directly to the human delegation. The weight of 10,000 ancient civilizations focused on their small platform. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the perfectly controlled temperature. The Primarch asked a simple question that reverberated through the chamber. What could humanity offer that had not already been tried? Marcus stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak under the pressure of so much attention. He had prepared dozens of speeches for this moment, but looking at the assembled power of the galaxy, they all seemed inadequate. These beings had technology, beyond human comprehension, wisdom accumulated over eons and resources that spanned thousands of star systems. What could humanity, barely out of their own solar system, possibly contribute? He thought about Earth's history, about the countless times humanity had faced annihilation and survived, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through something else, something that these advanced beings, in all their perfection, might have forgotten or never possessed. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound seeming absurdly small, in the vast chamber, and began to speak. The truth unveiled. Marcus's voice carried through the translation systems of the Grand Chamber, reaching every being present in their native form of communication. He began not with promises or boasts, but with a question that caused several of the ancient representatives to shift in what might have been surprise. Honored members of the core assembly, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word, you have told us about your weapons, your shields, your attempts at communication. But I must ask, when was the last time any of your species faced true extinction? The chamber fell silent. The constant low hum of various life support systems and energy fields seemed to grow louder in the absence of other sound. The Primarch who had addressed them tilted its ever-shifting form, a gesture Marcus interpreted as curiosity rather than offense. Marcus continued, pulling up his personal datapad and projecting images into the center of the chamber alongside the galactic map. The images showed Earth at various points in its history. The Toba supervolcanic eruption 70,000 years ago. Genetic evidence suggests the human population dropped to less than 10,000 individuals. We were one harsh winter away from extinction. The images shifted, showing more recent catastrophes. The Black Death, 700 years ago. 1/3 of our population dead in 5 years. The nuclear winter of 2087. The Gray Plague of 2203. The solar flare event of 2241 that destroyed our first 3 colony ships and everyone on them. Each disaster appeared as a hologram, raw and unfiltered, showing the devastation humanity had endured. A representative of the ethereals pulsed with what Marcus had learned was skepticism. Their electromagnetic communication was translated for the chamber. These primitive disasters are nothing compared to the entity we face. You speak of millions dead. We speak of entire civilizations being erased from existence. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the point. You're right. Our disasters were smaller in scale. But that's precisely my point. You've all become so powerful, so advanced that you've forgotten what it means to be vulnerable. When was the last time the architects faced a threat they couldn't simply rebuild around? When did the ethereals last encounter something that could truly end their existence? Captain Martinez stepped forward, adding her voice to the discussion. Every one of your attempted solutions has been based on overwhelming force or perfect defense. But humans learned something different. We learned that sometimes survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. Sometimes it's about being the most adaptable. The assembly stirred at this. Several species began communicating among themselves in ways that the translation systems couldn't interpret. Marcus seized the moment to present humanity's real proposal. You've tried to fight this entity. You've tried to shield against it. You've tried to communicate with it. But have you tried to understand it? Marcus asked. Not from your perspective, of advanced civilizations with everything to lose, but from the perspective of something hungry, something desperate, something that consumes because it must. A Vanguard Empire representative encased in armor that could withstand the pressure at a star's core spoke with barely contained disdain. You suggest we empathize with this destroyer? This is the wisdom humanity offers? Sylvia Reeds stepped forward now, her xenobiology expertise lending weight to her words. Not empathize. Analyze. Every predator in the universe follows patterns. Every parasite has a life cycle. Every consumer has preferences. You've been so focused on stopping this entity that you haven't asked the fundamental question. Why does it consume energy in this specific way? She pulled up her own data, showing analyses she had conducted during their journey. Based on your descriptions, this entity doesn't just consume energy randomly. It targets specific types of quantum signatures. It avoids certain regions of space even when they're rich in energy. There's a pattern here, a purpose. It's not just feeding, it's selecting. The collective consciousness, speaking through 1,000 synchronized voices, responded. We have analyzed its consumption patterns for 5 years. Our combined intelligence, spanning billions of minds, has found no meaningful pattern. Marcus smiled, a distinctly human expression that several species found unsettling. That's because you're looking at it from the perspective of beings who have never been truly hungry. Humans spent most of our evolution on the edge of starvation. We understand hunger in ways that your post-scarcity civilizations have forgotten. He pulled up new data, overlaying human analysis on the galactic map. The entity isn't just consuming energy, it's consuming specific quantum frequencies that match the background radiation of dying universes. We know this signature because we've detected it in our own experiments with dimensional rifts. Experiments that we conducted not to explore, but to escape, because that's what humans do when faced with extinction. We don't just fight. We look for any possible way out. The Primarch descended further, its attention fully focused on the human delegation. You suggest this entity is trying to escape something? Everything that consumes does so for a reason, Marcus replied. Survival, growth, reproduction, or escape. You've assumed it's the first 3, but what if it's the last? What if this entity isn't invading our galaxy, but fleeing something in its own realm? The implications of this statement rippled through the assembly. If the entity was fleeing something, then there was something even worse beyond the void. But it also meant the entity might be approached differently, not as a conqueror, but as a refugee. A quantum shaper, existing in multiple probability states simultaneously, spoke in harmonics that resolved into words. Even if your hypothesis is correct, how does this help us? A fleeing predator is still a predator. Marcus exchanged glances with his colleagues. This was the moment to reveal humanity's true proposal. On Earth we have a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If this entity is fleeing something, then we have a common threat. And humans have survived by turning threats into opportunities. He pulled up historical examples from Earth. When we faced the AI uprising, we didn't destroy our artificial intelligences. We integrated them, gave them purpose beyond their original programming. When we encountered the Martian microbe plague, we didn't just create antibiotics. We modified our own genome to coexist with them. We don't just adapt to threats, we adapt threats to us. The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, laughter emanated from one of the highest platforms. It was the ancients, beings so old they rarely participated in assembly discussions. Their representative, a creature of living metal that had witnessed the birth and death of stars, spoke for the first time in centuries. The youngest species in the galaxy proposes to tame the greatest threat we have ever faced. This is either the wisdom of innocence or the folly of ignorance. Marcus stood straighter. It's neither. It's the pragmatism of survivors. Every species in this chamber achieved dominance through superiority. Humanity achieved survival through desperation. We've made allies of enemies, turned poisons into medicines, and transformed disasters into opportunities. Not because we're noble or wise, but because we had no other choice. Sylvia added crucial technical details. We've brought something with us. A prototype device based on human quantum tunneling technology. It's primitive by your standards, but it does something none of your technologies do. It doesn't try to stop or redirect energy. It transforms it at the quantum level, changing its fundamental signature. She activated a small device and a miniature demonstration appeared in the chamber. A small amount of energy was introduced, matching the signature of the entity's consumption pattern. The device didn't block or absorb it. Instead, it transformed it into a different quantum state, one that would be useless to the entity but harmless to normal matter. You can't stop it from feeding, Sylvia explained, but you can change what it's feeding on, make the energy incompatible with its needs. It's like changing the frequency of light for a creature that can only see in one spectrum. The food is still there, but it becomes invisible, inaccessible. The technical representatives of various species immediately began analyzing the demonstration. The principle was absurdly simple, something their advanced sciences had overlooked because they had been focused on complex solutions. Sometimes humanity had learned the simple solution was the most effective. The Primarch spoke again, its tone different now, tinged with something that might have been respect. You propose we transform the quantum signature of our entire galaxy? Not transform, Marcus corrected. Adapt. Create zones of different quantum signatures. Give the entity paths through our galaxy that lead it away from inhabited systems, and while it passes through, we study it. We learn from it. And maybe, just maybe, we communicate with it. Captain Martinez added the military perspective. On Earth, we call it channeling. When you can't stop a flood, you direct it. When you can't defeat an army, you guide it to ground of your choosing. This entity is following quantum signatures like a trail. We can create new trails, false trails, safe passages that protect our worlds while we develop a permanent solution. The assembly erupted in discussion. Species that hadn't communicated directly in millennia began exchanging data. The human proposal was crude, based on primitive understanding of quantum mechanics, but it offered something none of their solutions had, a way to coexist with the threat while working toward a resolution. A representative of the Voidwalkers, beings who lived in the spaces between galaxies, spoke with authority. We have observed similar entities in the deep void. The humans may be correct. These beings are not invaders but migrants, moving through realities like your species move through space. If we can make our galaxy unappetizing, it may simply pass through. The discussion continued for hours. The greatest minds in the galaxy examined the human proposal from every angle. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly elegant. But it was something they hadn't tried, a perspective they hadn't considered. The primitive humans, with their crude technology and brief history, had offered something new. Finally, the Primarch called for order. The assembly would vote on whether to implement the human proposal. One by one, the ancient species cast their votes. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. But as the votes were tallied, a clear majority emerged in favor of trying the human approach. Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. They had done it. Humanity had stood before the greatest powers in the galaxy and offered something of value, not through strength or wisdom, but through the hard-earned experience of a species that had survived against all odds. The Primarch's final words resonated through the chamber. The youngest among us has reminded us of something we had forgotten. Survival is not about power alone. It is about adaptation, creativity, and the willingness to find new paths when old ones fail. Humanity will lead this initiative, not because they are the strongest, but because they remember what it means to be weak and survive anyway. As the assembly dispersed, representatives from various species approached the human delegation. Some offered resources, others knowledge, and a few even offered what might have been respect. The call to arms had been sounded, but it wasn't a call to war. It was a call to adaptation, to survival through understanding rather than force. Marcus looked at his colleagues, seeing his own exhaustion and exhilaration reflected in their faces. They had come to the assembly as representatives of a primitive species. They would leave as leaders of the galaxy's most important initiative. The entity was still coming, the threat was still real. But now the galaxy had something it hadn't had before, a human perspective on survival. Walking back to their ship, Captain Martinez remarked on the irony of the situation. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had turned to its youngest member for salvation. But perhaps that's exactly what was needed. Sometimes those who have everything forget how to survive with nothing. And humans, if nothing else, were experts at surviving with nothing. The journey back to Earth would take 2 weeks. But now, They carried with them the resources and support of the entire galaxy. The real work would begin soon, implementing the quantum signature modification across thousands of star systems, creating safe passages for the entity, and preparing contingencies if the plan failed. But for now, Marcus allowed himself a moment of pride. Humanity had shocked the galaxy's leaders not with power or technology, but with the one thing that had always defined them: the absolute refusal to give up in the face of annihilation. The call to arms had indeed been sounded, but it was a uniquely human call. Not to destroy the enemy, but to understand it, adapt to it, and ultimately survive it. Because that's what humans did. They survived.